Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. This is a story my grandmother used to tell, and every time she told it the same way, with the same small details, like it had stayed perfectly clear in her mind for years. It happened when she was much younger, sometime in the mid-1960s, in the city where she lived her whole life. It's a place known for its parks, so many that people often say it feels like the whole city is built around green spaces. There are large parks, but also smaller, fenced-in gardens scattered between streets, tucked into quiet squares where people can sit during the day. At night, though, those same places can feel very different. Back then, my grandmother worked at a theater. Her shifts often ended late, sometimes close to midnight. It was normal for her to catch the last bus home, and from there, she would walk the short distance to her building. It wasn't a long walk, but it did take her past one of those fenced-in communal gardens. During the day, it was a peaceful place, but at night, it was darker, quieter, and easier to feel uneasy around. There was one thing that always made her feel safe, though. There was a local policeman who would often meet her when she got off the bus. In those days, people knew the officers in their neighborhood. They weren't just strangers in uniform, they were familiar faces. This particular officer had gotten into the habit of walking her part of the way home, just to make sure she got back safely. It wasn't something she had asked for, but it became a routine, and over time, she came to rely on it. One night, things didn't go as expected. She was on the bus, heading home like usual. It was late, and the bus wasn't very full. At some point during the ride, a man sat down next to her. She noticed him right away. There was something off about him. Not something she could clearly explain, but enough to make her uncomfortable. He started asking questions, personal ones, things that felt too direct for a stranger. His tone wasn't friendly, and it wasn't casual. It felt intrusive. She tried to ignore him at first, giving short answers, hoping he would lose interest, but he didn't. The questions kept coming, and the feeling of unease grew stronger. Eventually, she decided to move. She got up and walked to the front of the bus, standing near the driver. She was a regular on that route, and the driver knew her. She started talking to him, making conversation, partly to distract herself and partly to make it clear she wasn't alone. The man stayed where he was, but she could feel his attention. When the bus finally reached her stop, she stepped off. Normally, this would have been the moment when the policeman would be waiting nearby. But that night, he wasn't there. That alone made her pause. Then, something else happened. At the last moment, the man from the bus stood up and got off, too. He hadn't made any sign that he was getting off at that stop before. It felt sudden, almost like he had decided at the last second. He didn't walk directly toward her. Instead, he moved in the opposite direction. But as he walked away, he kept turning his head, looking back at her. And that made the situation feel worse. It wasn't just that he had followed her off the bus. It was the way he kept watching her. Like he hadn't lost interest. Like he was still aware of her every movement. The bus pulled away, and that's when she noticed something else. In the middle of the road, not far from where she was standing, there was a dog, a large black dog. It stood out immediately. It wasn't moving, just standing there, solid and still. In the quiet of the night, with everything else already feeling tense, its presence felt strange. At that point, she was already uneasy. The man from the bus, the missing policeman, the empty street, and now this dog. None of it felt normal anymore. She started walking, faster than usual. She wanted to get home as quickly as possible. After a few steps, she realized the dog was following her. It wasn't right next to her. It kept a distance of about 20 feet. Far enough that it wasn't immediately threatening, but close enough that she couldn't ignore it. That made her even more nervous. She didn't know if the dog was stray, if it was aggressive, or what it wanted. It didn't bark, didn't run, just followed her at that steady distance. She kept walking. Her pace quickened. She turned a corner, moving into the part of her route that passed by the fenced-in garden. This was the part she liked the least, even on normal nights. As she approached the open gate, everything changed. The dog suddenly ran toward her, not slowly, not cautiously. It sprinted. In that moment, she thought it was going to attack her, but it didn't. It stopped just a couple of feet away, close enough that she could see it clearly. And then it started barking. Loud, aggressive barking. It wasn't directed at her. It was directed past her, toward the garden. The dog's body was tense. Its fur was raised. It was growling, barking, acting like something was there, something that had its full attention. My grandmother didn't wait to figure out what it was reacting to. That moment was enough. She turned and ran, as fast as she could. She didn't look back. She didn't stop. All she wanted was to reach home. As she ran, she could hear the dog again. But this time, it wasn't barking. It was following her again. Just like before. Keeping a distance. Not trying to catch her. Not trying to get ahead of her. Just staying close enough that she knew it was there. Almost like it was guiding her. She kept running until she reached her building. When she got to the entrance, she rushed inside. Before going up, she looked back. The dog was still there, standing in the street, watching her, not moving, just watching. She went inside and up to her flat as quickly as she could. Once she was inside, she told my grandfather everything that had happened. He listened, then went to the window to look outside. There was nothing there. No dog, no movement. The street was empty. The next day, they found out something that made the whole experience even harder to explain. The policeman who used to meet her at the bus stop had died the day before. A heart attack. He hadn't been there that night because he couldn't be. A few days later, there was another piece of news. A young woman had been attacked. It had happened only a few streets away from the route my grandmother took home that same night, around the same time. When she told the story, she never claimed to know exactly what happened. She didn't try to give it a clear explanation. But she always believed one thing, that whatever that dog was, it wasn't there to harm her. It was there to keep her safe. It never came too close. It never tried to touch her, but it stayed with her the whole way. And when she reached safety, it was gone. Just like that. Even now, when I think about it, it's hard to explain in a simple way. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe it was a stray dog reacting to something in the dark. Or maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that if that dog hadn't been there that night, things might have ended very differently. And that's the part that stays with you. After I finished high school, I went through a phase where I seriously thought about joining the military. I didn't have everything figured out yet, And like a lot of people at that age, I was trying to decide what direction my life should take. The military seemed like a solid option at the time. Structure, purpose, a clear path forward. It all sounded appealing in theory. I started meeting with recruiters from different branches just to get a feel for what each one offered. Most of them were pretty straightforward. They gave me information, answered my questions, and left it up to me to decide if I wanted to take the next step. But one of them stood out. He was a Marine recruiter, and he approached things very differently. I was working a cashier job at the time, one of those typical part-time jobs you have right after high school. It wasn't anything special, just a way to make some money while I figured out what I wanted to do next. One day, he came through my checkout line. He didn't say much at first, just handed me his business card and told me to give him a call if I was interested. Something about his confidence stuck with me. So the next day, I called him. That's when things started to move quickly. He came to my house not long after that. We sat down and I went through some of the standard recruiting steps. There was a reading test, some basic evaluations, and then this exercise with cards where I had to rank what mattered most to me in life. Things like family, success, stability, purpose. He used that to explain how the Marines could help me achieve those things. At the time, it felt convincing. He invited me to visit his office, which was in a nearby town. I went there, and he showed me around. It wasn't a huge place, just a small recruiting office, but in the back, they had an area where potential recruits would meet a couple of times a week to train for physical tests. He was very involved, very present. After that, he started checking in on me regularly. He would come through my line at work every week or so, just to see how I was doing, ask if I had made any decisions, and keep the conversation going. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It felt like part of his job. But over time, I started to reconsider my decision. My family wasn't thrilled about the idea of me joining the military. Neither was my boyfriend. They had concerns. And the more I thought about it, the more I started to question whether it was really what I wanted. Eventually, I decided it wasn't. I made up my mind that I wasn't going to pursue it any further. A few days later, he came through my line again, like he usually did. That time, I told him my decision. I tried to be polite but clear. I explained that I appreciated everything, but I didn't think the military lifestyle was right for me. He didn't react badly in that moment. He nodded, said he understood, and that was it. At least that's what I thought. After that, things changed. He started showing up every day. Not once a week, not occasionally. Every single day I worked, he was there. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he had errands nearby. But after a while, it became obvious that it wasn't random. He was coming to see me. I started to feel uncomfortable, but I didn't know what to do about it. I was young, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of something if I wasn't completely sure it was a problem. Then one night, everything escalated. I was working a late shift, closing the store. It was one of those nights where things move slowly, and you're just counting down the minutes until you can leave. He came through my line around 8:30 that night. We made small talk like usual. Nothing too out of the ordinary. And then he left. I thought that was the end of it. I finished my shift, closed up, and finally clocked out around 10:15. I walked out through the employee exit, ready to go home. And there he was, standing outside, waiting. My stomach dropped immediately. He walked up to me like it was completely normal, like he had every reason to be there. Then he started walking with me to my car. I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, but I felt frozen. I didn't want to escalate the situation, and I didn't know how he would respond. When we got to my car, he leaned against the door, blocking it. I couldn't open it. I couldn't get in. And then he started talking. At first, it sounded like the same things he had been saying before. About the Marines, about opportunities, about how I would be a great fit. But the tone was different now, more intense, more persistent. He kept pushing, promising me things, trying to convince me that I was making a mistake. The longer it went on, the more uncomfortable I felt. People started leaving the building, other employees finishing their shifts. I tried to catch their attention, hoping someone would notice what was happening, but no one did. Or if they did, they didn't intervene. I felt completely alone. This went on for about 30 minutes. 30 minutes of being stuck there, unable to leave, listening to him push harder and harder. Finally, I realized I needed to get out of that situation somehow. I told him I had forgotten my jacket inside and needed to go back in to get it. Then I started walking toward the entrance. My plan was simple. Get inside, find someone, call for help, do whatever I needed to do to not go back out there alone. But before I could get very far, he followed me. He took off his jacket and handed it to me, saying I should wear it to stay warm. Then he apologized like he suddenly realized he had gone too far. For a moment, I thought maybe that was the end of it. He told me to go ahead and get into my car. So I did. I got inside, closed the door, and felt a small sense of relief. I tried to hand his jacket back to him through the window. That's when he said something that made my heart drop again. He told me to keep it, that he would follow me home and get it back from me there. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I started the car and slowly drove out of the parking lot, my mind racing. I was scared, but also unsure of how serious the situation was. I didn't know if I should call the police. I didn't know if I was overreacting. But then I saw his headlights behind me. He was following me. That's when the fear became real. He was a big guy, physically much stronger than me. He had military training. For all I knew, he could have had a weapon. The thought of him knowing where I lived made everything feel even worse. I picked up my phone and called my boyfriend. My voice was shaking as I told him what was happening. He didn't hesitate. He told me to come straight to his house. He said his dad would be there, waiting outside, and that I would be safe there. That gave me something to focus on. As I drove, I kept checking my rearview mirror. His headlights stayed there, following me down the highway. Then, at the last moment, I made a decision. I took an exit earlier than expected. And I didn't just slow down. I floored it. I pushed the car as fast as I could, taking turns quickly, trying to lose him. My heart was pounding the entire time, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they hurt. I don't know if he got confused, if he missed the turn, or if he just gave up. But he disappeared. When I finally pulled up to my boyfriend's house, his dad was already outside, just like he said he would be. And the Marine was nowhere in sight. I stayed there that night. The next day, we talked about what to do. One of our friends was a local police officer, so we reached out to him for advice. He suggested something I hadn't even considered. He told us to contact the Marine's commanding officer and report what had happened. So that's what I did. I called out of work that day and made the call. I explained everything, from the constant visits to him following me. I also mentioned that I still had his jacket. The officer I spoke to took it seriously. He arranged for me to come to the office at a time when the Marine wouldn't be there, so I could return the jacket safely. When I arrived, I handed it over. He thanked me, listened carefully, and then told me something that stayed with me. He said that the Marine would be sent far away from our town, and that this situation would be handled. I never saw him again after that. Looking back, it might not sound as extreme as some other stories, but at the time, It was the most scared I had ever been in my life, because it wasn't something distant or imagined. It was real. It was someone who knew where I worked, who watched my schedule, who waited for me, who followed me. And for a while, I didn't know how it was going to end. That's what made it so terrifying. A while back, my boyfriend and I decided to take a trip out to a secluded hot spring in Idaho. It was one of those places that you don't just stumble across. You have to know about it, and you have to be willing to work a little to get there. That was part of the appeal for us. We wanted something quiet, something away from people, somewhere we could just relax without any distractions. It was March at the time, and even though winter was technically ending, there was still a lot of snow on the ground. The trail leading to the hot springs was about 2 miles long, which didn't sound like much on paper, but the conditions made it more challenging than we expected. The air around the springs was warm and humid, which caused the snow and ice on the trail to melt and refreeze in the strange ways. The ground was slick, uneven, and at times felt almost dangerous to walk on. There were moments during the hike when we questioned whether it was worth it. Our boots slipped more than once, and we had to move slowly to avoid falling. But at the same time, there was something exciting about it. It felt like an adventure, like we were going somewhere most people wouldn't bother trying to reach. Eventually, after taking our time and being careful, we made it. The hot springs were exactly what we had hoped for. Steam rose into the cold air, creating this soft, misty atmosphere that made everything feel a little unreal. The water was warm, almost perfectly so, especially compared to the freezing temperatures around us. There was no one else there, not a single person. It felt completely isolated. We set our things down, looked around one more time just to be sure, and then got in. We took off our clothes, sank into the water, and let ourselves relax. After the hike, it felt amazing. The contrast between the cold air and the warm water was something I can still remember clearly. We stayed there for hours. We talked, laughed, drank some wine we had brought with us, and just enjoyed the moment. At one point, we even joked about how lucky we were that no one else had made the trip out there. Given how slippery and difficult the trail had been, it made sense. It felt like we had the place completely to ourselves. Time passed in that slow, peaceful way it does when you're comfortable and not thinking about anything else. Then something changed. At first, it was just a movement in the distance. Both of us noticed it at the same time. A figure coming up the trail toward the hot springs. For a moment, we just watched, trying to figure out what we were seeing. It didn't make sense right away. We hadn't expected anyone else to make the hike, especially with how bad the conditions were. But there he was, a man walking toward us. Our first reaction wasn't panic. It was more like surprise. We figured he would come up, maybe say hello, and then get into the water himself. It was a public place, after all. Even if it felt private, it wasn't actually ours. We assumed that when he got close, we would just get out and leave to give him space. But that's not what happened. As he approached, something about him felt off. He didn't seem tired from the hike, even though we had struggled to get there ourselves. His movements were steady, almost too steady for someone who had just come up that trail. He didn't say anything at first, just kept walking until he was close enough that we could see him clearly. Then he climbed up to where we were sitting. That alone felt strange. He didn't stop at a distance. He didn't give us space. He came right up to us, close enough that it immediately made the situation uncomfortable. He started asking questions. At first, they seemed random. He asked if we had seen any deer or animals in the area. His tone was flat, almost casual, but something about it didn't sit right. It didn't feel like normal conversation. It felt like he was asking for a reason we didn't understand. We told him no. Then we tried to steer the situation in a safer direction. We told him that if he wanted to use the hot springs, we would leave and give him privacy. That should have been enough. But he didn't move. He didn't acknowledge what we said in any meaningful way. He just stayed there. And he kept looking at me. I was still naked. That's when the situation shifted from uncomfortable to something much worse. There's a certain kind of feeling you get when you realize you're not in control of a situation anymore. It's not immediate panic, but it's close. It's that awareness that something could go wrong very quickly, and you're not sure how to stop it if it does. That's what it felt like. My boyfriend and I exchanged a quick look. We didn't say anything out loud, but we both understood what was happening. He was tense, watching the man carefully, ready to react if he needed to. I could tell he was preparing himself in case things turned violent. He had a knife with him, but it was in his backpack, which we had left a few feet away from where we were sitting. Close, but not close enough to grab instantly without making it obvious. The man kept standing there. He didn't try to get into the water. He didn't step away. He didn't stop staring. Time felt slow again, but in a completely different way than before. Instead of relaxing, every second felt heavy, like we were waiting for something to happen. In my mind, I started thinking through possibilities. What if he attacked us? What if he had a weapon we couldn't see? What if he was waiting for the right moment? All of those thoughts ran through my head in a matter of seconds. Even though outwardly I tried to stay calm, my boyfriend shifted slightly, positioning himself in a way that made it clear he was between me and the man. It wasn't aggressive, but it was protective. For a moment, I honestly thought things were about to escalate. Then, without warning, the man turned away. He didn't say anything else. He didn't respond to our offer to leave. He just turned and started walking back down the trail. Just like that. We didn't move right away. We stayed there for a few seconds, watching him leave, making sure he was actually going and not just stepping away for a moment. When he was far enough that we felt a little safer, we moved quickly. We got out of the water, grabbed our clothes, and got dressed as fast as we could. The peaceful, relaxed atmosphere we had been enjoying earlier was completely gone. Everything felt tense now. Even after we started hiking back, the feeling didn't go away. It's hard to explain, but it felt like we were being watched. Like even though we couldn't see him anymore, he might still be somewhere nearby, just out of sight. The trail felt longer on the way back. Every sound made us more alert. The crunch of snow under our feet, the shifting of branches, even the wind moving through the trees. We kept looking around, checking behind us, trying to make sure we were alone. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. We both knew how close that situation could have come to something much worse. The thing that bothered me the most afterward was how little sense it all made. It wasn't hunting season. He didn't have any visible gear or equipment that suggested he was out there for a reason like that. No gun, no proper supplies, nothing that matched the questions he was asking. He just showed up, asked strange questions, refused to leave, and then walked away. To this day, I still think about what could have happened if things had gone differently. If he hadn't left. If my boyfriend hadn't been there. If we had reacted in a different way. It's one of those situations where nothing actually happened, but it easily could have. And sometimes that's even more unsettling. because you're left with the realization that you were in a vulnerable position, completely exposed, with someone whose intentions you couldn't understand. And all you can do is be thankful that it ended the way it did. Even now, when I think back on that day, I don't remember the peaceful part as clearly as I remember the moment he appeared, because that's when everything changed. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to take a long road trip up the west coast of the United States. It was something we had talked about for a while, and when we finally made it happen, it felt like the kind of experience you don't forget. We packed up the car, brought our camera gear, and planned to stop at national parks along the way, camping whenever we could. We were both really into photography, so the whole trip was built around chasing good light. Sunrise, sunset, those quiet in-between moments that make landscapes look unreal. Every stop had a purpose, even if it didn't feel structured. At one point during the trip, we planned to head into Death Valley. We had heard a lot about it before going, but being there is something completely different. It's not just another desert. It feels bigger, emptier, and more unforgiving than most places you can drive through. We left later in the day than we probably should have, around 5 p.m. The plan was to make it to the sand dunes before sunset. We knew the sun would go down around 8 o'clock, and we wanted to catch that magic hour light, the kind that photographers chase because it turns everything into something dramatic and almost unreal. The drive itself was intense. The temperature was around 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with the windows down, the air felt hot and dry, like it was pulling moisture out of your body with every breath. We kept the air conditioning off because we didn't want to risk the car overheating out there. That's one of those things you learn quickly in a place like that. If your car fails, you're not just stuck. You're in serious trouble. There's almost no cell service in Death Valley. Before heading in, it's strongly recommended that you tell someone exactly where you're going and when you plan to leave. That way, if something goes wrong and you don't check in, someone can alert authorities. Even then, finding you out there isn't easy. It's a massive, open area, and you can disappear into it without much effort. We knew all of that. And still, we went. We made it to the sand dunes just in time. The sun was already starting to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the sand. The light changed quickly, shifting from bright gold to something softer, more muted. Then came the colors. There's something strange about sunsets in Death Valley. It's not just the usual orange and pink. There's this faint purple and red haze that seems to hang in the air, glowing in a way that feels almost unnatural. It's beautiful, but there's also something eerie about it. Like the place doesn't quite belong to the same world as everything else. We took photos for a while, moving around the dunes, trying to capture as much as we could before the light disappeared completely. Eventually, the sun dropped below the horizon, and darkness settled in quickly. Out there, when the light goes, it really goes. We packed up our gear and made our way back to the car. By the time we got there, it was fully dark. The kind of darkness where your headlights feel like the only thing keeping you connected to reality. We got in and started the drive back. Almost immediately, the mood shifted. There's something about driving through a place like that at night that puts you on edge. It's not loud or obvious. It's quiet, subtle, but it sits in the back of your mind. The knowledge that if something goes wrong, you're on your own. I found myself focusing more than usual, watching the road carefully, listening to the car, paying attention to every small detail. I kept thinking about what would happen if we got a flat tire or if the engine overheated. Even something small could turn into a serious problem out there. We'd been driving for about 20 minutes when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. Headlights. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Another car on the road isn't unusual, even in a place like that. But what caught my attention was how fast they were approaching. Within a short time, they were much closer. Then they started flashing their high beams. Once, then again, and again. I assumed they wanted to pass. That seemed like the most logical explanation. Maybe I was driving too slow for them. Or maybe they were in a hurry to get somewhere. So I moved slightly to the side, giving them space to go around. But they didn't. They stayed right behind us, and they kept flashing their lights. At that point, I started to feel uneasy. It didn't make sense. If they wanted to pass, they had plenty of opportunity. The road was open, and there was nothing stopping them. So why weren't they going around? A new thought crossed my mind. Maybe they needed help. Maybe something had happened to them, and they were trying to get our attention. That seemed possible. Out there, people rely on each other more than they might in a city. If someone is in trouble, you're more likely to stop. So I slowed down. Eventually, I came to a stop, but I didn't get out of the car. Not yet. I watched them carefully through the rearview mirror as they pulled up behind us and stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I noticed it was a minivan. That alone didn't mean anything, but combined with everything else, it added to the strange feeling. I could see movement inside, like people shifting around, but it was too dark to make out details. I sat there, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to help, if they really needed it. But another part of me was telling me something wasn't right. Then the side door of the van slid open. A light inside turned on. And suddenly, I could see them. There were multiple people inside. 5 or 6 at least. They were moving quickly, grabbing things, stepping out one by one into the darkness. And then they started walking toward our car. That was the moment everything changed. There was no clear explanation for what they were doing. No signal that they needed help. No attempt to communicate. Just movement. And it didn't feel right. Not even a little. I didn't wait to find out more. My foot hit the gas immediately. The car surged forward. And within seconds, their headlights became smaller and smaller in the distance. I didn't look back for long. I just focused on getting as far away from them as possible. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The silence in the car felt heavy. We both knew how quickly that situation could have gone differently. If I had gotten out of the car, if I had waited longer, if I had assumed it was safe. We didn't know what they wanted. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. But in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was getting away. The rest of the drive felt different. The road didn't feel empty anymore. It felt uncertain. Every shadow, every distant light, every movement made us more aware of how vulnerable we were out there. We eventually made it out safely. But the experience stayed with us. It changed the way we thought about places like that. About isolation. About how quickly things can shift from peaceful to something else entirely. Even now, when I think back on that trip, I remember the beauty of the dunes, the colors of the sunset, the quiet of the desert. But I also remember those headlights and the feeling that something wasn't right. Sometimes that feeling's the only warning you get. I worked the night shift at a campground, from midnight to 8 in the morning, every single night. At first, it didn't seem like a bad job at all. In fact, compared to most night jobs, it was almost peaceful. The campground would quiet down after midnight, and by the time I settled into my shift, the only sounds left were insects, distant wind through trees, and the occasional crack of something moving out the dark. Most nights, I barely saw anyone. On busier weekends, maybe one or two people would come by the little shack where I worked, asking for directions or help with something small. But most of the time, it was just me. The shack itself was tiny, about 8 feet by 8 feet, barely enough space for a chair, a desk, and a couple of shelves. It sat alone near the entrance of the campground, surrounded by darkness once the sun went down. There were no nearby buildings, no streetlights, nothing but the faint glow of my desk lamp and whatever light spilled out from the windows. I got used to the isolation quickly. I would bring my old PS2 with me and pass the time playing games, occasionally glancing up at the darkness outside just to remind myself that I was still alone. During my first week, I was being trained by the guy who had been working the same shift before me. He was quitting, and I was taking over permanently. He showed me the basics, how to check people in, how to log anything unusual, and what to do in case of emergencies. Before his last night, he mentioned something that stuck with me. A few feet away from the shack, near the edge of the gravel path, there was an old payphone. It looked outdated, like something left behind from another decade. Most people didn't even notice it anymore. He told me that every night at exactly 4:17 in the morning, that payphone would ring once, just once, and then it would stop. He laughed it off when he told me, saying it was probably some kind of automated test call. He admitted that he had never answered it himself. Something about the way he said it made it feel like he didn't really want to. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It sounded like one of those weird but harmless quirks you sometimes find in quiet places. For the next few months, I settled into the job. It was summer, and most nights were warm. I kept the windows of the shack closed to keep bugs out, and with them shut, I couldn't hear much from outside. If the payphone rang, I never noticed it. The idea of it slowly faded from my mind as I focused on my routine. Then, around mid-August, the nights started getting a little cooler. I began leaving the windows open to let the air move through the shack. That's when I heard it for the first time. At exactly 4:17 in the morning, the payphone rang. It wasn't loud. In fact, it sounded strangely muffled, like the sound was coming from underwater. The ring was distorted, almost unnatural, and it cut through the silence in a way that made my skin crawl. It only rang once, just like I had been told, and then everything went quiet again. The first time it happened, I froze. I remember staring out the window toward the payphone, barely able to see it in the darkness. Nothing else moved. No one was there. After a few seconds, I told myself it was exactly what the other guy had said, some kind of automated call, and I went back to what I was doing. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same single ring. And then the next night, and the next, it became a pattern. Every night at 4:17, that phone would ring once, sounding like it didn't belong in the world around it. It started to get under my skin. Even when I knew it was coming, it still made me tense up every time I heard it. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. After hearing it night after night, I started wondering what would happen if I actually answered it. It didn't make sense for a phone to ring like that without someone being on the other end. There had to be an explanation. One night, I decided I was going to find out. I set an alarm for 4:15 in the morning so I wouldn't miss it. When the alarm went off, I got up from my chair and stepped outside. The air was cool, and the campground was completely silent. I walked over to the payphone and stood there waiting. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, right on time, it rang. The sound was even worse up close. That same muffled, warped tone echoed through the quiet, and for a second, I hesitated. Then I picked up the receiver. I pressed it to my ear and said hello. There was nothing on the other end. No static, no voice, nothing. Just a kind of empty silence that felt like someone was there but refusing to speak. I said hello again, a little louder this time, but still got no response. After a few seconds, I hung up. The whole thing felt strange, but not necessarily dangerous. I went back inside the shack and tried to brush it off. The next night, I did the same thing, and the night after that. For an entire week, I answered the phone every time it rang. Every single time, it was the same. Silence. Not even the faintest sound. After a while, it stopped feeling important. I convinced myself it was just some glitch or malfunction, something that didn't need any deeper explanation. Eventually, I stopped answering it altogether. The phone would ring, and I would just sit there, letting it fade back into silence. About a month passed like that. By the time October rolled around, the nights had gotten colder, and the campground was quieter than ever. Fewer people were staying there, and some nights I wouldn't see a single person for the entire shift. The isolation felt heavier during that time, like the darkness pressed in a little closer than it had before. For some reason, during the first week of October, I started thinking about the payphone again. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was the way the silence felt deeper than usual. But the curiosity came back. One night, I decided I would answer it again. Just like before, I set my alarm for 4:15. When it went off, I stepped outside and walked over to the phone. The air felt colder than usual, and there was a stillness to everything that made me uneasy. I stood there, waiting. At exactly 4:17, the phone rang. I picked it up immediately and held it to my ear. Hello? Hello? For a second, there was nothing. Then I heard something. It sounded like someone inhaling sharply through clenched teeth. The sound was rough, uneven, like it scraped against itself. It didn't sound natural. It didn't sound like a normal person breathing. Before I could say anything else, a voice came through. It was low and harsh, like the person speaking had something stuck in their throat. The closest thing I could compare it to was someone gargling gravel before trying to talk. It was the kind of voice that made your chest tighten, just hearing it. And then it said my name. Not just my first name. My full name. First, middle, and last. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind just stopped. I had never heard that voice before in my life, but it knew exactly who I was. My throat tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Without thinking, I slammed the receiver back onto the hook. My hands were shaking, and I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the phone like it might ring again. I didn't want to leave it at that. As scared as I was, I needed to know where the call had come from. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out some change and fed it into the payphone. My fingers fumbled slightly as I pressed *69 to call back the last number. The line rang, and after a moment, I got the automated response telling me where the call had originated. California. I stood there in the cold, holding the receiver to my ear, trying to process what I had just heard. I was in Indiana. There was no reason for a call like that to come from that far away at the exact same time every night to a forgotten payphone in the middle of a campground. I slowly hung up the phone and stepped back. The campground was silent again, like nothing had happened. But everything felt different now. The darkness didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something was out there, just beyond what I could see. I went back into the shack, locked the door, and sat down. But I couldn't focus on anything for the rest of the shift. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow outside the window felt like it was moving. The phone didn't ring again that night. But from that moment on, I never answered it again. I was 15 when my family moved to Utah. It wasn't a big city or anything like that. It was a smaller town just north of Salt Lake City, far enough west that the wind would sometimes carry a strange smell from the lake. On certain days, especially, when the air was heavy and still, the whole place would smell faintly rotten, like something spoiled sitting too long in the sun. It was the kind of smell you never really got used to, even after months of living there. The move itself had already been difficult, but what made things worse was the timing. I arrived halfway through the school year, right in the middle of sophomore year. Back where I came from, that wouldn't have been such a big deal, but in Utah, high school started its sophomore year instead of freshman. That meant everyone already knew each other, already had their groups, their routines, their inside jokes. I felt like I had been dropped into the middle of something that had already been going on for years, and I had no way to catch up. I was awkward, quiet, and completely out of place. The first few weeks were rough. I kept my head down, spoke when I had to, and spent most of my time trying not to draw attention to myself. It felt like I was starting high school all over again. Except this time, everyone else was already settled in. I remember sitting in the cafeteria alone more often than not, pretending to be busy with my phone or my food just to avoid looking like I had nowhere to go. The only real bit of luck I had during that time was meeting a girl named Sarah. It didn't happen in any dramatic or memorable way. We just ended up talking one day. And somehow that turned into more conversations, and eventually into something closer. By the time the school year was coming to an end, we'd started dating. It wasn't anything complicated. We were both young, and it was simple in the way teenage relationships usually are. But for me, it meant everything. She made the place feel less foreign, less lonely. When summer came, things got easier. We had more time to spend together, and without the pressure of school, I started to feel more comfortable in my new surroundings. We would hang out almost every day, finding small ways to pass the time, talking about nothing important, just enjoying the feeling of not being alone. There was something I didn't really understand at first, though. I didn't know much about the culture in Utah, especially when it came to religion. I learned pretty quickly that many families there were Mormon, and that it was common for them to have large families. At the time, I didn't think too deeply about it. It just seemed like one of those regional differences you notice but don't question too much. Sarah's family was one of those large families. She had 6 sisters, making 7 girls in total, ranging from very young to nearly adults. The first time she told me that, I remember being surprised, but not necessarily alarmed. It just seemed like a lot of people in one house. I only met her mom once. It was brief, and honestly, a little overwhelming. She seemed tired, distant, and she was pregnant at the time. I never met her dad. That wasn't something I questioned back then either. There were a lot of things I didn't question, probably because everything around me already felt unfamiliar, and I didn't want to dig too deep into anything that might make it feel even stranger. Most of the time, Sarah and I avoided her house altogether. She had a strict curfew, and because of that, I couldn't just pull up to her driveway and knock on the door like a normal boyfriend. Instead, I had to park down the street and wait for her to come out and meet me. There was a small gully near her house, lined with trees that ran along the side of the property. The first time I saw it, I thought it would be an easy shortcut. If I crossed it, I could get closer to her house without having to walk all the way around. But when I suggested that, she immediately shut the idea down. She insisted that we go the long way, even though it meant passing by her parents' window. At the time, I didn't think too much about it. I assumed she just didn't want to risk slipping or getting her shoes wet. The ground around the gully could be uneven, and sometimes there was water running through it. It seemed like a reasonable enough explanation, so that became our routine. I would park down the street, and she would walk along the edge of the gully, circle around her house, and meet me up the road. Sometimes I would walk a little closer, but I always made sure not to step too far onto the property. The last thing either of us wanted was to alert her parents. We did this for a couple of months. It became normal, just another part of the way things worked between us. Looking back, there were small things that felt off, details that didn't quite make sense. But at the time, I ignored them. I was just happy to have someone. And I didn't want to risk that by asking too many questions. Then there was the night it rained. It wasn't just a light drizzle. It was the kind of steady rain that soaks everything, turning dirt into mud and making the ground slick and unpredictable. I remember sitting in my car watching the rain hit the windshield, thinking about how she would have to walk alone through the dark to meet me. I didn't like the idea of that. It didn't feel right to just sit there and wait while she made her way through the rain. So I decided I would surprise her. Instead of waiting at the usual spot, I would walk closer to her house and meet her near the back door she used to sneak out. To do that, I would have to cross the gully. I told myself it would be quick and easy. The rain had made the water run a little higher than usual, but it didn't look too deep. I figured I could jump across without much trouble. I was wrong. When I jumped, my feet hit the ground on the other side, but instead of landing firmly, I sank into the mud. The earth was soft and unstable, and before I could catch my balance, my feet slid out from under me. I fell backward into the water with a heavy splash. The cold hit me immediately. It was sharp and sudden, taking the breath out of me for a second. Instinctively, I reached out to grab something, anything, to pull myself up. My hand caught onto something near the edge, something solid enough to hold on to. But as I tried to use it to pull myself up, it shifted and broke loose, moving with the current. The water wasn't very deep, maybe 2 or 3 feet, but the mud made it difficult to stand properly. I planted my feet and pushed myself upright, still holding on to whatever I had grabbed. That's when I realized it was a black garbage bag. I dropped it immediately, more out of surprise than anything else. It didn't make sense for something like that to be there. I tried to climb up the side of the gully, but the mud was too slick. Every time I reached for something to hold on to, it would give way under my weight. My hands kept landing on more of those same black bags. They were everywhere, half buried in the mud, shifting and sliding as I tried to use them for support. The texture of them felt wrong, too soft, too unstable. I remember feeling a growing sense of unease, like something wasn't right, even though I couldn't yet explain why. After a few failed attempts, I grabbed onto one of the bags more firmly, and trying to use it to pull myself up. As I did, the plastic tore open. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. In the dim light and the rain, it just looked like something rotten, something that had been sitting there for too long. There was a shape inside, dark and decayed, surrounded by what looked like old, broken pieces. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it clearly. It was a skull, small, far too small. For a moment, my brain refused to process it. I just stared at it, trying to convince myself I was wrong. But there was no mistaking it. The shape, The size, the way the skin clung to it in patches, it was unmistakable. It was a baby's skull. A sound came out of me before I even realized it. A shout, loud and sharp, cutting through the rain and the darkness. The smell hit me at the same time, thick and overwhelming, making my stomach turn. All I wanted was to get out of there. I scrambled, slipping and sliding, using anything I could find that wouldn't fall apart under my hands. Somehow, I managed to pull myself up the side of the gully and onto solid ground. I backed away quickly, pressing myself against a nearby tree, my heart pounding so hard, it felt like it might burst. That's when I saw her. Sarah was standing a short distance away near the edge of the trees. She was crying. I hadn't even heard her approach. She must have been waiting for me at the usual spot and came looking when she heard me shout. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and there was something in her expression that I didn't fully understand at the time. But one thing was clear. She wasn't surprised. That realization hit me almost as hard as what I had just seen. It meant that, on some level, she already knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the full truth, but enough. We didn't say much to each other in that moment. I don't even remember if we spoke at all. Everything felt distant, unreal, like I was watching it happen instead of living it. After that night, I never saw her again. She stopped coming to school, and so did her sisters. One by one, they all disappeared. There were rumors at first, quiet whispers among students and teachers, but no one seemed to know exactly what had happened. Then the news came out. Her father had been arrested. According to the reports, he had decided that he had too many children. Instead of stopping, instead of finding any other solution, he had been disposing of the newborns, burying them out by the gully, hidden just beneath the mud and the debris. They recovered 5 bodies. All of them were girls. I remember sitting in silence after hearing that, trying to make sense of it, trying to connect the person I thought I knew with the reality of what had been happening just a short distance away. Even now, years later, there's one thought that still lingers in the back of my mind. I can't help but wonder if he had just been waiting for a son. It was one of those nights where nothing important had happened, and I was just winding down before going to sleep. I'd been sitting around watching random late-night TV, the kind of shows you don't even pay attention to, just letting the noise fill the room. By the time I finally got up, it was around midnight, maybe a little later. The house was quiet, and everything had that still, heavy feeling that comes late at night when most people are already asleep. Before going to bed, I called my dog so I could let him out into the backyard. It was part of the routine. He would wander out, do his thing, and then come back in so we could both crash for the night. Nothing unusual about it. That night, though, the moment I stepped outside, something felt off. There was no moon out, and I didn't have any yard lights on, so the entire backyard was swallowed in darkness. Not the kind where you can still make out shapes or outlines, but the kind where everything blends together into one solid black space. I couldn't see the fence clearly, couldn't see the far end of the yard, couldn't even really see where the ground stopped and the garden began. It was just darkness. At first, I stood there like I always did, waiting for my dog to come out. But within a few seconds, I felt it. That feeling that you're not alone. It wasn't the usual kind of nervousness you get when you're standing in the dark. It wasn't imagination running wild or shadows playing tricks on your eyes. It was something stronger, something sharper. It felt like my body was reacting before my brain had time to understand why. Like some kind of instinct had been triggered. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My arms prickled. like static was running across my skin. Everything around me felt too quiet. Not just normal quiet, but unnaturally still, like the entire space was holding its breath. I didn't move. I just stood there, completely alert, trying to listen. That's when my dog came out. He trotted into the yard like he always did, relaxed and completely unaware of anything unusual. He stretched, let out a lazy yawn, and for a brief moment I almost convinced myself that I was overreacting, that whatever I was feeling was just my imagination. Then everything changed. His ears shot up instantly. If you've ever seen a bull terrier lock onto something, you know exactly what that looks like. Their whole body shifts. They go from relaxed to focused in a split second, like a switch has been flipped. Mine was a big white bull terrier, around 90 pounds, strong but usually calm. He was the friendliest dog you could imagine, the kind that would rather lick someone to death than hurt them. But in that moment, he wasn't calm. His entire posture changed. His muscles tightened, his stance lowered slightly, ready to move. The fur along his back stood up, and his attention locked onto something out there in the darkness, something I couldn't see. Then he started growling. It wasn't a normal growl either. It was deep, aggressive, and full of warning. It didn't sound like curiosity or confusion. It sounded like pure anger. Whatever he was sensing out there had flipped something inside him that I had never seen before. Before I could even react, he took off. He launched himself into the darkness, barking and growling, charging straight toward whatever had caught his attention. It all happened so fast that my brain barely had time to catch up. 1 second he was standing beside me, and the next he was gone, swallowed by the blackness. I panicked. Without thinking, I yelled out his name and started running after him. My heart was racing, and I couldn't see where I was going, but I didn't care. All I knew was that something was out there, and my dog had just gone straight at it. I remember shouting into the darkness, threatening whoever might be in my yard, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. At the same time, there was this part of me hoping I wouldn't actually run into anything. It was a strange mix of fear and adrenaline, like my body didn't know whether to fight or run. Then I heard it. A loud, sickening impact. I heard a sharp thwack that echoed through the yard. Immediately after, my dog yelped. The sound hit me hard. It wasn't just a bark or a growl. It was pain. Real, sudden pain. And then I saw him. He came sprinting back toward the house, moving faster than I had ever seen him run. His tail was tucked between his legs and his head was low. Even in the darkness, I could see something was wrong. As he got closer, I saw the blood. It was all over his head, from his nose up to his ears. Dark and wet, catching what little light there was. For a second, everything inside me just froze. Then the fear turned into anger. Something had hurt my dog. I stopped where I was, still standing in the darkness, barefoot and completely exposed. My heart was pounding, but now it wasn't just fear driving me. I shouted into the yard again, louder this time, threatening whoever or whatever was out there. I don't even remember exactly what I said, just that I meant it in that moment. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard movement near the wooden gate at the edge of the yard. Loud scraping sounds, like someone was climbing over it in a hurry. There were a couple of heavy thuds, like feet hitting the ground on the other side, and then silence. Complete silence. Whatever had been in my yard was gone. I didn't wait around to confirm anything. The moment the noise stopped, I turned and ran back into the house. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my hands shaking as I did. My dog was already inside, hiding under the couch. Seeing him like that hit me harder than anything else. This was a dog that was always confident, always playful, never scared of anything. And now he was cowering, trying to make himself as small as possible. I knelt down and called him softly, trying to calm him down. It took a moment, but eventually he came out, still shaking slightly. I pulled him into a hug, checking him over as best as I could. There was blood everywhere on his head. For a few seconds, I was convinced he had been seriously injured. My mind was racing through all the possibilities, trying to figure out what to do next. But as I started cleaning him up, wiping away the blood, something strange became clear. There were no wounds, no cuts, no bites, nothing that explained the amount of blood I was seeing. I checked him over again, more carefully this time, parting his fur, feeling along his head and neck. Still nothing. That's when it hit me. The blood wasn't his. Whatever had been in the yard, my dog had gotten to it. He had done some damage before getting hit himself. Enough damage to come back covered in blood that didn't belong to him. The thought sent a chill through me. I didn't know who had been out there or why they were in my yard in the first place. I didn't know what they had used to hit my dog or how bad they had been hurt in return. All I knew was that something had been close enough to attack and that it had just barely gotten away. That night, I didn't take any chances. I brought my dog into my room and let him sleep on the bed with me. I grabbed a baseball bat and kept it within reach, just in case. Every little sound in the house made me tense up. Every creak or shift of the building felt louder than usual. I kept expecting to hear something outside. Footsteps, movement, anything that would suggest whoever it was had come back. But nothing happened. The night passed slowly, and eventually, morning came. In the days that followed, I kept a closer eye on things. I checked the yard during daylight, looked near the gate where I had heard the noise, but I never found anything definite. No clear signs of who it had been or what they had been doing there. My dog, on the other hand, bounced back almost immediately. Within a day or two, he was back to his usual self. Playful, relaxed, completely unfazed on the surface. But there was something different about him after that night. A kind of confidence, like he knew what he had done. When we went out to the park, he carried himself differently. There was a swagger in the way he walked, like he had proven something, even if no one else knew the full story. And maybe he had. Because whatever had been in that yard that night, it had come in quietly, hidden in the dark, thinking it had the advantage. And it left bleeding. For a long time, I had been living in the basement of my family's house. It wasn't exactly by choice at first, but over time it became my space. It was quiet, separate from everything else, and after a while I got used to being down there on my own. The basement had this constant low hum of silence, broken only by the occasional creak from the house above or the faint sound of pipes in the walls. It felt removed from the rest of the world, which, at the time, was exactly what I needed. Things in my life had been falling apart recently. There had been some serious family issues, the kind that shake everything you thought was stable. It forced me to see things more clearly, including my relationship. I had been with someone who, looking back, wasn't good for me at all. But when you're in it, it's hard to see things the way they really are. Eventually, everything came to a head. One night, after everything that had been building finally spilled over, I ended things with my ex. It wasn't calm or clean. It turned into a full argument, messy and emotional, and it escalated to the point where the police had to get involved. That alone should have been enough to make me feel some kind of relief once it was over, but instead, I just felt drained, completely exhausted, mentally and emotionally. That same night, my brother wasn't home. Normally, that wouldn't have mattered much. But after everything that had just happened, I didn't feel comfortable being alone in the basement. It suddenly felt too isolated, too cut off. So instead of going downstairs like I usually did, I decided to stay upstairs and sleep on the couch. I told myself it was just in case my brother came home. But really it was because I didn't want to be alone down there. The house felt different that night. Quiet in a way that wasn't relaxing, more like tense. Every small sound seemed louder than it should have been. I remember lying there on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm my mind enough to fall asleep. Eventually, I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. It was around 8 when I got up. The light coming through the windows made everything feel normal again, like the events of the night before had already started to fade. For a moment, I even convinced myself that things were going to be okay. Then I went downstairs. The moment I stepped into the basement, something felt wrong. It wasn't obvious at first. Nothing was dramatically out of place, nothing broken or overturned. But there was this subtle shift, like the space wasn't exactly how I had left it. My brain picked up on it before I could fully understand why. I looked around more carefully. Some of my things had been moved. Not in a chaotic way, but just enough to notice. Small items that I knew I had left in certain spots were slightly off. And then I saw my laptop. It was open. I was sure I had closed it before going upstairs the night before. I always did. It was a habit. Seeing it sitting there, open and powered on, sent a wave of unease through me. I felt my chest tighten, and my thoughts started racing. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe in the stress of everything that had happened, I just hadn't noticed leaving it like that. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. I walked over slowly and looked at the screen. It was still on, not asleep, not locked. That alone made my stomach drop. I moved the mouse slightly, and the browser window came into focus. Without really thinking about it, I clicked on the history. The most recent page visited was still there at the top. It was a bus schedule. Specifically, it was a route from my house to my ex's place. And the time listed for the bus was only a few minutes away from when I had woken up. For a second, everything around me seemed to go quiet. My heart started pounding, and I could feel that familiar rush of panic building in my chest. I hadn't searched for that. There was no reason for me to look up a bus route to my ex's house. Not after what had happened. Not after the police had been involved. The thought of going back there hadn't even crossed my mind, which meant someone else had done it. The realization hit hard. Someone had been in the basement. Not just briefly, not just passing through. They had used my laptop. They had been there long enough to look up travel plans, and they had done it while I was upstairs, asleep, completely unaware. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. My hands started to shake as I looked around the room again, this time with a completely different perspective. This wasn't my space anymore. Someone else had been here. I forced myself to move, to check the rest of the basement. Part of me didn't want to, but I knew I had to. I needed to know if they were still there. The basement had a back room, a smaller area that I didn't use very often. It was mostly for storage, and I rarely went in there unless I needed something specific. As I approached it, I felt my heart beating harder with every step. I pushed the door open slowly. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, but then I noticed it. There was a makeshift bed set up in the corner. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a pile of blankets and some clothing arranged in a way that made it clear someone had been sleeping there. It looked recently used, not something that had been left behind for a long time. I froze. My mind tried to process what I was seeing, but it didn't feel real. It felt like something out of a bad dream, something that didn't belong in my life. Then I noticed the window. It was open. That window was usually kept shut. I knew that. It wasn't something I would have opened, especially not at night. The basement window led directly outside, low enough that someone could climb in if they wanted to. Everything clicked into place at once. My ex, it had to be. After everything that had happened the night before, after the argument, after the police, they had come back. Not to the front door, not in any obvious way, but quietly. Through the basement window. They had been in my space, moving my things, using my laptop, sleeping just a few rooms away from where I would normally have been. If I had gone downstairs that night, like I usually did, I would have been there with them. The thought made my stomach twist. I stood there in that doorway for what felt like a long time, just staring at that makeshift bed, trying to wrap my head around it. The idea that someone had been that close to me without me knowing was overwhelming. It wasn't just fear. It was a deep, unsettling feeling of violation. My space, the one place I thought I had control over, had been entered and used without my knowledge, and not by a stranger, but by someone who knew me, who knew where I lived, who knew my routines. I quickly backed out of the room and made my way upstairs. Every instinct in my body was telling me to get out of that basement, to put distance between me and whatever had happened there. Once I was back upstairs, I locked the doors and checked the windows, making sure everything was secure. My mind kept replaying the same thought over and over again. I had just barely missed them. They had been there while I was in the house, while I was asleep, close enough to hear me, maybe even see me if they had come upstairs. And I had no idea. That realization stayed with me long after that day. Even after everything was handled, or even after I knew they weren't coming back, the feeling didn't go away completely. Because once something like that happens, you don't just forget it. You start to question every small sound, every out-of-place detail. You become more aware of your surroundings in a way that never fully turns off. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet again, you can't help but think about how close you came to walking into something you would never have been prepared for. Back in the 90s, I worked for a production company in Hollywood. It wasn't a typical office building. The company operated out of a large house that had been converted into a workspace. From the outside, it still looked like a normal, expensive home, but inside it had been redesigned with offices, editing rooms, and work areas. It had this strange mix of comfort and professionalism, like you were working in someone's house, but still expected to treat it like a corporate environment. The people who owned the company were extremely wealthy, the kind of wealthy where everything ran smoothly, because there were always people behind the scenes making sure it did. They had full-time security staff, people who lived on the property, and others who handled different aspects of the house and business. It was the kind of place where nothing felt neglected. And there was always someone around, even late at night. I got into the habit of staying late after work. Sometimes I had projects to finish, but other times I stayed just because I didn't feel like going home yet. One of the perks of the place was a huge television in an upstairs den. It was easily the biggest TV I had access to at the time, and watching movies there late at night became something I looked forward to. The house would quiet down after hours, and it almost felt like I had the entire place to myself. Even though it felt empty, it never truly was. The security team would patrol the property throughout the night. Every night, like clockwork, one of the guards would come down into the office area to check that everything was okay. I got used to hearing them. Their footsteps, the soft sounds of doors opening and closing, the general movement of someone doing their rounds. Whenever I heard them, I would usually step out and let them know I was still there, just so they wouldn't think something was wrong. At first, everything about it felt normal. But after a while, I started noticing something strange. There were times when I would hear movement, just like I did when the guards came through. Footsteps, faint shifts, the subtle sounds of someone walking around. But when I stepped out to check, there would be no one there. No guard, no staff, nothing. The first few times it happened, I brushed it off immediately. It was easy to explain away. Maybe I had just missed them. Maybe they had already moved on to another part of the house, or maybe the sound had come from the TV upstairs, and echoing in a way that made it seem closer than it was. That's the thing about places like that. When you're alone late at night, your mind fills in the gaps. You hear something, and your brain tries to make sense of it as quickly as possible. I didn't think much of it. I had no reason to. This went on for months. Every now and then, I would hear something that didn't quite line up, but I always found a way to rationalize it. I had been working there for almost a year by the time something happened that I couldn't explain so easily. One night, I was actually working late instead of watching movies. I was sitting at my desk, focused on whatever project I had in front of me. My desk was positioned just behind the reception area, separated from the main floor by a half wall. From where I sat, I couldn't see everything, but I could see enough of the open space beyond that wall. The house was quiet, completely quiet. There was no TV on, no background noise, nothing to distract me, just the faint hum of the building and the sound of my own movements as I worked. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it. That unmistakable feeling that someone is watching you. It wasn't subtle. It didn't creep in slowly. It hit all at once like a switch had been flipped. 1 second, I was focused on my work, and the next, I was completely aware of something else in the room. I froze for a moment, then slowly looked up. And that's when I saw her. She was peering around the edge of the wall, just enough that I could see her face. Her hair was long and white, hanging loosely around her shoulders. Her skin was pale, almost unnaturally so, and her eyes were wide open, fixed directly on me. There was something wrong about the way she was looking at me. It wasn't just attention. It felt intense, almost unhinged. But what stood out the most was her mouth. It was stretched back into this strange, rigid expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough that it felt like one. It was pulled tight, exposing her teeth in a way that didn't look natural, like her face had been locked into that position. I stared at her, and she stared back. The strangest part of it all was the way I was seeing her. Even now, it's hard to explain. It didn't feel like I was seeing her in the normal sense, like light hitting my eyes and forming an image. It felt like she was there, but also not. Like the image of her was somehow being placed directly into my mind. I know how that sounds, and I've thought about it a lot over the years, trying to find a better way to describe it. But that's the closest I can get. It didn't feel like a normal visual experience. It felt like something deeper, something I couldn't fully understand. We stayed like that for what felt like a long time, but was probably around 10 seconds. Neither of us moved. Then, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I turned back to my computer and went back to work. Outwardly, I stayed calm. I didn't react, didn't jump, didn't run, but inside my thoughts were racing. Every instinct I had was telling me that something was very wrong, but I forced myself to stay still, to act like nothing had happened. Part of me was convinced that I had imagined it, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me after spending too many late nights alone in that place. After a minute or so, I looked back toward the wall. She was gone, just like that. The space was empty again, exactly as it should have been. No sign that anything had been there at all. That was enough for me. I shut everything down as quickly as I could without completely panicking. I gathered my things, turned off the lights, and left. I didn't run, but I moved fast. Faster than I ever had leaving that place before. For the next week, I tried not to think about it. I told myself it was stress, or fatigue, or just one of those things that happens when you're alone too much. I had no proof that what I saw was real, and I didn't want to start convincing myself of something I couldn't explain. Then, about a week later, I was up at the owner's main house, helping set up for some kind of event. They often hosted gatherings, and sometimes employees would help out with preparation. There was a family from South America that worked for them. The parents were employed by the household, and the owners were helping their kids get through school. Over time, I had gotten to know them a little, and we were on friendly terms. While I was in the dining room, I ended up talking with the husband. It was casual at first, just normal conversation. But then, almost without thinking, I asked him something. I asked if anything strange had ever happened down at the office. The moment the question left my mouth, I realized how odd it sounded. But it was too late to take it back. He looked at me for a second. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He asked me if I had seen her, too. There was no hesitation in his voice, no confusion about what I meant. It was like he already knew exactly what I was talking about. I didn't even know what to say at first. I just nodded slightly, waiting for him to explain. He told me that I wasn't the only one. There were women who worked at the house who refused to go anywhere near the office. They wouldn't step foot in that building, no matter what. They didn't explain it in detail, but it was clear that they had experienced something that made them draw a hard line. Something had happened there. I tried to find out more after that. I looked into the history of the place, tried to figure out what the house had been before it was converted into an office, or who had lived there before the current owners. But I never found anything solid. No clear answers, no obvious explanation. Whatever it was, it didn't leave a paper trail. After that, I stopped staying late. The idea of sitting alone in that house at night, knowing what I had seen and knowing that others had experienced something similar, wasn't something I could ignore anymore. The comfort I had once felt there was gone, replaced by a constant sense of unease. Not long after that, I left the company. It wasn't entirely because of what happened. There were other reasons, normal reasons that come with changing jobs, but I won't lie and say it didn't play a part. Because once you experience something like that, once you see something you can't explain and then find out you weren't the only one, it changes the way you look at a place. Even now, years later, I still think about that night, about the way she looked at me, and about the fact that I wasn't supposed to be the first person to see her. When I was a kid, I grew up in South Florida, in one of those neighborhoods where everything felt close together, but still somehow quiet at certain times of the day. It was the kind of place where kids spent hours outside, riding bikes, fishing in nearby canals, and wandering around without much worry. Back then, life felt simple. The days were long, the air was warm, and even the sudden storms that rolled in felt like just another part of normal life. On this particular day, I was out with my two cousins, who were twin sisters. They were both about 10 at the time, and I was 8. We had spent the afternoon fishing, just messing around like kids do, not really caring whether we caught anything or not. It was more about being outside together than anything else. In South Florida, the weather has a way of changing without much warning. One moment the sky is clear, and the next it's like someone flipped a switch. That's exactly what happened that day. Out of nowhere, the sky darkened, and within minutes it started pouring rain. Not a light drizzle, but one of those heavy, soaking rains that hits hard and fast. We didn't waste any time. The moment it started coming down, we grabbed our stuff and started running toward my house. The rain soaked through our clothes almost instantly, and the ground became slick under our feet. But we didn't slow down. We were laughing at first, the way kids do when something unexpected happens, but all we wanted was to get inside and dry off. When we finally reached my house, we ran up to the front door, expecting it to be open, or at least quickly answered. My parents were hosting a party that day, so there were plenty of people inside. Out came music, voices, laughter. It should have been obvious that someone would hear us. But when I tried the door, it was locked. That alone wasn't too strange. Sometimes the door would be locked, even if people were home. So I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when things started to feel off. At first, it was just a small feeling, something in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite explain. But within seconds, it grew stronger. It wasn't just me, either. I could tell my cousins felt it, too. The mood shifted completely, like the air around us had changed. We all became scared. Not the kind of fear that comes from seeing something or hearing something obvious. It was deeper than that. It felt instinctive, like our bodies were reacting to something we couldn't see or understand. The twins started to panic, their voices shaking as they called out. And before long, they were crying. I remember feeling it just as strongly. My heart was racing, and I couldn't figure out why. There was no clear reason for it. We were standing at my own front door in broad daylight, with a house full of people just on the other side. And yet, it felt wrong. The rain kept pouring down, soaking us completely, and I banged on the door again, harder this time. I shouted for my parents, calling out as loudly as I could, expecting someone, anyone, to respond. That's when we heard it. A voice. It was a child's voice, small and clear. "You can come over here." The three of us froze. For a moment, none of us moved. We all looked at each other, trying to confirm that we had actually heard it. Then we started looking around, scanning the yard, the street, anywhere the sound could have come from. There was no one there. No kids, no neighbors, no one hiding or standing nearby. Just the rain and the empty space around us. The fear got worse. We started pounding on the door again, more urgently now. Our movements frantic. The twins were crying harder, and I could feel panic building in my chest. Then the voice came again. "Come over here." It sounded the same as before. Close, but not close enough to pinpoint. It didn't echo or fade the way a normal voice would in the rain. It just existed, like it was right there with us. We looked around again, more desperately this time, but still saw nothing. At that point, we lost it completely. All three of us started crying, overwhelmed by a fear that didn't make sense, but felt completely real. It was like something was wrong with the situation in a way we couldn't explain, and our bodies were reacting to it whether we understood it or not. Then, for the third time, the voice spoke. "Don't be scared." That was it for me. I couldn't stand there any longer. Something inside me snapped, and I knew I had to get away from the front door. Without thinking, I turned and ran along the side of the house. The fence there wasn't too high, and I had climbed it before, but never in a rush like that. My hands slipped a little from the rain, but I managed to pull myself up and over. I dropped down into the backyard, my heart pounding as I looked around. And everything was normal, completely normal. The entire back patio was full of people. My parents, their friends, everyone was gathered there, talking, laughing, enjoying the party. There was music playing, drinks on the tables, the usual kind of scene you'd expect. It was like stepping into a different world. Just seconds before, I'd been standing in the front yard, soaked in rain, terrified for reasons I couldn't explain. And now I was surrounded by familiar faces, noise and warmth. My dad noticed me immediately. He walked over quickly, concern on his face, asking what was wrong. I must have looked like I'd seen something terrible, because I couldn't even form a proper sentence. I tried to explain, but the words didn't come out right. All I could say was that something was wrong, that we were scared, that there was a voice. He didn't fully understand, but he followed me anyway. Together, we went through the house toward the front door. When we opened it, my cousins were still there, standing in the rain crying. They ran inside the moment the door opened, still shaken, still trying to process what had just happened. The strange thing is, we never really explained it properly to anyone else there. Maybe it was because we didn't have the words, or maybe it was because it sounded too strange to say out loud. Over time, it became one of those things that just sat in the back of our minds. Years passed. We grew up, moved on with our lives, and that day became just another memory from childhood. But it never fully went away. It stayed with us, not as something we talked about often, but as something we all remembered clearly. Recently, we brought it up again. We were older now, in our mid-20s, sitting together, having a few drinks, and talking about old memories. Somehow, the story came up again. At first, it was casual, almost like we were testing each other to see if we all remembered it the same way. But as we talked, it became clear that we did. Every detail matched. The rain, the locked door, the fear that came out of nowhere, and most of all, the voice. We all remembered it the same way. Even now, we can't explain it. There's no clear answer, no logical explanation that fits everything we experienced. It wasn't just one of us imagining things. All three of us heard it, felt it, reacted to it in the same way. And even after all these years, it still stands out as one of the scariest moments of our lives. Not because we saw something, but because we didn't. A few years ago, I decided to go for a long walk alone through the woods in England. It was one of those rare, perfect days where everything feels calm and clear. The sky was bright, the sunlight filtered softly through the trees, and the air had that fresh, clean feeling you only really notice when you're far away from cities and noise. It felt like the kind of day where nothing could go wrong. I didn't have a strict plan. I just wanted to walk, explore, and enjoy being outside. The woods stretched on for miles, and I let myself wander without worrying too much about direction. At the time, it felt freeing. I followed paths when I saw them, stepped off them when something interesting caught my eye, and kept moving forward without thinking about how I'd get back. After a couple of hours, though, I realized I was a bit more lost than I had intended to be. It wasn't panic-inducing at first. I still had a general sense of where I was. I could hear faint traffic somewhere in the distance, which meant there was a road nearby. That was enough to keep me calm. As long as I kept moving in roughly the right direction, I figured I would eventually find my way out. The woods themselves were beautiful. Everything around me looked like something out of a painting. At one point, I came across a small stream running gently through the trees. Beside it stood an old watermill, weathered and worn, clearly unused for a long time. It looked like something from another era, quiet and still, blending into the landscape as if it had always been there. I paused there for a while, just taking it in. The sound of the water, the way the light hit the moss-covered wood, the complete absence of people. It all felt peaceful, almost unreal in how perfect it seemed. I kept walking. Not long after, I reached the clearing where the trees opened up enough for sunlight to pour in. In the middle of that clearing sat an old Massey Ferguson tractor. It was rusted and abandoned, clearly not used in years. The paint had faded, and parts of it looked like they were slowly being reclaimed by the environment. The sunlight filtered through the leaves above, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across it. It should have felt eerie, but it didn't. At that point, everything still felt strangely charming, like I was stumbling across pieces of history hidden in the woods. Further along, I came across something else. It looked like an old trailer, the kind you might see in a small trailer park. But this one was in terrible condition. It had been there so long that it had started to collapse in on itself. The structure had bent and broken, sagging off the brick supports that once held it up. Around it were scattered pieces of rusting farm equipment, half buried in the ground or overtaken by weeds. That was the first moment things started to feel slightly off. Not dangerous, just different. The kind of place that made you pause for a second before continuing, even if you couldn't explain why. Still, I kept going. Eventually, I reached a barbed wire fence that cut straight across my path. It stretched out in both directions, blocking the way I had been heading. On the other side, I could see more open land, and I knew that beyond that, there was likely a road. Turning back would have meant retracing my steps for quite a distance, and I didn't want to do that. So instead, I decided to follow the fence, hoping to find a way through. As I walked along it, I started noticing signs. They weren't official or professionally made. They were handwritten, attached to the fence in uneven ways. The words were simple but clear. Keep out. No entry. Some had additional warnings, written in a rushed, almost desperate way. The more I saw, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't just the message of the signs. It was the way they looked. They didn't feel like standard warnings. They felt personal, like someone had gone out of their way to make sure people stayed away. I hesitated, but I kept moving. Eventually, I found a spot where the fence dipped slightly. There was a badger hole underneath it, just large enough for me to squeeze through if I tried. I stood there for a moment, looking at it, weighing my options. On one hand, the signs were clear. On the other, I could still hear the road in the distance. I convinced myself it would be fine. I wasn't planning to stay, just to pass through and get back to a place I recognized. So I got down and crawled through. On the other side, the ground opened up into what looked like farmland. There was a track leading away from an old barn, and I figured that if I followed it, it would eventually take me to the road. As I approached the barn from behind, I noticed movement inside. There were 2 horses. They were tied up, standing in the dim interior, and something about them immediately felt wrong. They looked thin, unhealthy, their bodies not quite right. Even from a distance, I could tell they weren't being properly cared for. There was also a smell. It wasn't overpowering at first, but it was there, carried faintly on the air. Something sour, something that didn't belong in a place that should have been open and fresh. At that point, I became very aware of the fact that I wasn't supposed to be there. I was trespassing. The signs had made that clear. The last thing I wanted was to run into whoever owned the land, especially given the condition of the place. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Someone angry, someone armed, someone who wouldn't take kindly to a stranger wandering around. So I moved quietly. I kept my distance from the barn, trying not to disturb the horses, and focused on reaching the track beyond it. As I walked, I paid more attention to my surroundings, glancing back toward the trees, listening for any sound that might suggest someone else was nearby. The ground beneath my feet started to feel uneven. At first, it was subtle. Small bumps, slight dips, nothing too unusual for a rural area. But as I continued, it became more noticeable. The surface wasn't just uneven. It felt unstable, like I was stepping on things that shifted under my weight. Then I stepped down and something cracked. It was a sharp, dry sound, completely out of place. I stopped and looked down. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It looked like a curved shape, pale against the darker ground. For a second, my brain tried to make it into something normal, something harmless. Then it clicked. It was a rib cage, a pig's rib cage. The bones were exposed, picked clean in places, with bits of decayed material still clinging to them. The shape was unmistakable. I stepped back immediately, a wave of disgust hitting me, and then something else cracked under my foot. Another one. That's when I really looked around, and what I saw made my stomach drop. I wasn't just standing near one or two carcasses. I was standing in the middle of dozens. They were everywhere, spread across the ground like a grim carpet, in different stages of decay. Some were nothing but skeletons, bleached and broken. Others were partially decomposed, their forms still recognizable. Some looked more recent, their bodies swollen, dark, and still contained within black bags that had been torn or left open. It went on farther than I could take in at a glance. The smell suddenly made sense. It hit me all at once. Stronger now that I knew what I was surrounded by. Thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. I didn't think anymore. Every bit of caution I had been holding onto disappeared. I didn't care about being quiet. Didn't care about being seen. All I wanted was to get out of there. I moved as fast as I could, stepping carefully at first, then not caring where my feet landed as long as I was moving away. I climbed over the uneven ground, pushing past the edge of that horrible area and onto the track. Once I was clear, I ran. I followed the track until I reached a gate, a simple 5-bar gate that marked the edge of the property. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed onto it, pulled myself up, and jumped over without slowing down. On the other side, I kept moving until I felt like I had put enough distance between myself and that place. Only then did I slow down. The walk home felt different. Everything that had seemed beautiful earlier now felt slightly off. The woods, the quiet, the isolation. It all carried a different weight after what I had seen. Later, I learned that the area had been affected by the foot and mouth outbreak. It was a serious issue at the time, and farms had been forced to cull entire herds to prevent the disease from spreading. My best guess is that the farmer had pigs that became infected and didn't want to report it. Maybe they were afraid of losing everything. Maybe they thought they could handle it themselves. So instead, they let them die and left them there. I never went back to that part of the woods again. Some places look peaceful from the outside, until you get too close. When I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time in the car while my parents ran errands. It was just one of those normal things back then. You'd get dropped into the back seat with a book or a toy, told to wait for a few minutes, and that was it. No phones, no distractions, just you and your thoughts, while the world moved quietly outside the windows. On that particular day, I was sitting alone in the back seat of our station wagon in a parking lot. I don't remember exactly where we were, but I remember the feeling of it clearly. It wasn't crowded or busy, just a typical open lot with a few cars scattered around. My parents had stepped away for a bit, probably to run into a store nearby, and I had been told to stay in the car. I didn't mind at first. I was used to it. I was just sitting there staring out the window. I'd maybe lost in my own thoughts when it happened. A loud bang hit the glass beside me. It came out of nowhere. The sound was sharp and sudden, so loud that it made me jump in my seat. My heart immediately started racing, and for a split second, I didn't even know what I was looking at. Then I saw him. There was a man standing right outside the car, close enough that his face was only inches from the window. I hadn't seen him approach. One moment I was alone, and the next, he was just there. He gestured for me to open the door. At that age, I was going through a phase where I questioned everything. I didn't just do what people told me without asking why. It was probably annoying for the adults around me, but in that moment, it ended up being the one thing that worked in my favor. Instead of reacting the way he expected, I looked at him and asked why. He didn't hesitate. He told me that my grandmother was very sick and that he had been sent to take me to the hospital. The way he said it was calm, almost practiced, like it was something he had already thought through. But even as a kid, something about it didn't sit right with me. My mind started racing. Both of my grandmothers lived about an hour away. If something serious had happened, there was no way someone would just show up like this without calling first. And even if they had called, it wouldn't be some random person coming to pick me up from a parking lot. Another thought hit me just as quickly. How did he even know where I was? We weren't at home. We weren't somewhere predictable. We were in a random parking lot, about 15 minutes away from where we lived. There was no reason for anyone to come looking for me there. None of it made sense. Something inside me shifted from confusion to alertness. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew enough to know that I shouldn't open that door. Without saying anything else, I reached up and locked it. I remember noticing in that exact moment that the door had been unlocked the entire time. That realization sent a chill through me. The man tried the handle almost immediately. He pulled on it, expecting it to open, but it didn't. There was a brief pause, like he hadn't expected resistance. Then he moved slightly, trying again, testing it more firmly this time. My heart was pounding harder now. I leaned forward quickly, reaching into the front seat to lock the driver's door. And then I reached across as far as I could to lock the passenger door as well. My movements were rushed, clumsy, but focused. I didn't want to leave anything open, any chance for him to get in. Outside, he started moving around the car. I could see him through the windows as he went from one door to another, checking each one, pulling on the handles, trying to find a way inside. The sound of the handles rattling echoed in the quiet space around me, each attempt sending another wave of fear through my chest. I felt completely exposed. Sitting there in the back seat, surrounded by glass, with someone on the outside trying to get in, I felt like I had nowhere to go. There was no way out for me, no place to hide. It was like being trapped in a fishbowl while something circled around you, looking for a way in. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just sat there, watching him, trying to stay as still as possible while my mind raced through every possible outcome. He kept checking the doors for a few moments longer, moving from one side of the car to the other, testing each handle like he hoped one of them would give. But they didn't. Eventually, something in his behavior changed. I don't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was the realization that I wasn't going to open the door. Maybe it was the risk of someone else noticing what he was doing. Whatever it was, he stopped. He looked at me one more time. Then he walked away. Just like that. No explanation, no apology, nothing. He simply turned and left, disappearing into the parking lot as quietly as he had appeared. I sat there for a long time after that, still frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was still racing and my hands felt shaky, but I didn't move. I didn't unlock the doors, I didn't relax, I just waited. When my parents finally came back to the car, I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of relief. The moment they opened the door, the tension that had been building inside me started to break. I told them what had happened, or at least I tried to. It came out in pieces at first, the details scattered and jumbled, but eventually they understood. Looking back on it now, it's clear how serious that situation was. At the time, I didn't fully grasp it. I just knew that something felt wrong, and I reacted the only way I knew how. I questioned him. I didn't trust what he said. And when things didn't add up, I acted. I locked the doors. It's strange to think about how something so small, something as simple as refusing to cooperate, could make such a big difference. At that age, being difficult was just part of who I was. I didn't realize that it could actually protect me. But in that moment, it did. If I had been more trusting, more willing to listen without questioning, things might have turned out very differently. Instead, I stayed in the car, and the doors stayed locked. Sometimes, what feels like a flaw ends up being the thing that keeps you safe. Back when my wife and I were still in college, long before we got married, we used to do things that felt harmless at the time, but probably weren't the smartest decisions. We were undergrads in Montana, living on a tight budget like most students, always looking for small ways to make life a little more enjoyable without spending money we didn't have. One of the things we started doing was sneaking into a local Best Western hotel to use their pool and hot tub. It wasn't something we overthought. The hotel wasn't strict about checking guests, and most of the time, the pool area was empty anyway. It felt like a quiet little escape from everything. Classes, assignments, and the constant stress that came with being students. Usually it was just the two of us. We'd slip in, keep to ourselves, and relax in the hot tub or swim for a while. And it became a routine of sorts, something we looked forward to after long days. The atmosphere was always calm, almost too calm, with that familiar echo of water and the faint hum of the building around us. For a long time, nothing unusual ever happened, until one night. That evening started just like any other. We made our way into the hotel, walked casually past the front desk, and headed toward the pool area. When we got there, though, it wasn't empty like usual. There was a family already there. It looked like a typical setup. Parents with 3 kids, along with what seemed to be a family friend. The kids were playing in the pool, splashing around and laughing, while the adults kept an eye on them. It wasn't ideal, since we preferred having the place to ourselves, but it wasn't a big deal either. Well, we weren't doing anything we shouldn't have been, just sitting in the hot tub and relaxing. So we stayed. We got into the jacuzzi and tried to ignore the noise from the pool, settling into our usual quiet conversation. For a while, everything felt normal. The kids played, the adults chatted, and we stayed in our corner of the hot tub, minding our own business. Then, after some time, another person showed up. He came in alone. At first, nothing about him seemed too out of place. He walked into the pool area, looked around briefly, and then approached the hot tub where we were sitting. He asked if we minded if he joined us. Now, given the situation, we weren't exactly in a position to say no. We weren't even supposed to be there in the first place, so we just shrugged it off and said it was fine. What happened next was strange. Before he got into the hot tub, before he even took off his outer layer of clothing, he walked right up to the edge of it and knelt down. Without saying anything, he leaned forward and dunked his head straight into the water. Not quickly, not casually. He kept it there for a long time. It was long enough that both of us noticed and exchanged a glance. It felt excessive, uncomfortable even. Then he pulled his head back out, water dripping everywhere, and shook it hard, sending droplets splashing onto us. We didn't say anything, just sat there, unsure of what to make of it. Then he did it again. He dunked his head back into the water, holding it there for another long stretch. When he came up, he repeated the same motion, shaking his head, spraying water around. He did this several times. What made it even more uncomfortable was how close he was to us. The hot tub wasn't huge, but it wasn't tiny either. There was space for him to do whatever he was doing at the other end, away from us. But instead, he chose to do it right next to where we were sitting. It felt deliberate. After repeating this odd routine a few times, he finally got into the hot tub. But even then, the behavior didn't stop. He lowered himself into the water and then stretched out his body horizontally, submerging himself almost completely. He stayed under like that for what felt like an unusually long time, holding his breath without moving much at all. While he was doing this, his legs were extended toward us. At first, we tried to ignore it. But then his feet started brushing against us, not aggressively, not in a way that was clearly intentional, but enough to make it uncomfortable. It crossed that invisible line where you go from tolerating someone's presence to feeling like you need to leave. We didn't say anything. We just got out. Without making a scene, we stepped out of the hot tub and moved over to the pool where the kids were playing. It felt safer to be around other people, even if it was noisier. The shift in atmosphere helped a little, but we were both aware of what had just happened. He stayed in the hot tub. For about 10 more minutes, he just sat there, like nothing had happened. Eventually, he got out, wrapped himself in a towel, and moved toward the pool area. That's when things got even more unsettling. He didn't get into the pool. Instead, he crouched down near the steps at the shallow end, close to where the kids were playing. His posture was strange. He pulled himself into a tight, almost curled position, with his arms wrapped around his legs. And then he just stayed there, watching. He stared at the kids as they played, not interacting, not speaking, just watching. Slowly, he started rocking back and forth, still in that curled position. The expression on his face was intense, focused in a way that didn't feel normal or appropriate. The longer it went on, the more noticeable it became. The parents noticed. We noticed. Even the kids seemed to sense that something wasn't right. For several minutes, he just stayed there, rocking slightly, staring with that same fixed expression. The whole room felt tense, like everyone was silently trying to figure out what to do without escalating the situation. Eventually, he seemed to realize that people were watching him, that he had become the center of attention. Without saying anything, he stood up, turned, and left the pool area. Almost at the same time, one of the parents moved quickly toward the entrance, clearly intending to call hotel security. That was enough for us. We decided to leave as well. We didn't want to be there anymore. The entire mood had shifted from relaxed to uncomfortable, and neither of us felt like sticking around to see what happened next. As we were getting ready to leave, my wife went into the women's restroom to change. I stayed outside near the exit, waiting for her. The pool area was quieter now, but I still felt uneasy, like something wasn't fully resolved. That's when I looked out the window toward the parking lot and saw him. He was sitting in his car, parked in a spot where he had a clear view of the building, and he was staring directly at me. It wasn't a casual glance. It wasn't someone just looking around. It was direct, focused, intentional, like he had been waiting there, watching. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I didn't take my eyes off him. He didn't look away. We just stared at each other through the glass, separated by distance but still very aware of each other's presence. The longer it went on, the more uncomfortable it became. As soon as my wife came back out, I told her what I had seen. We didn't waste any time after that. I called the police and explained the situation as clearly as I could, leaving out the part about us not being guests at the hotel. We stayed inside near the entrance, keeping an eye on the parking lot. After a while, he finally drove off. Only then did the tension ease. We left shortly after that, both of us quiet on the way home, replaying everything that had happened. It was one of those experiences that sticks with you, not because anything actually happened, but because it felt like something could have. After that night, we never went back to that hotel pool again. Some things just aren't worth the risk.